Happy Halloween! It's that time of the year where we read creepypasta stories, posted on the internet. Paranormal horror stories meant to unnerve and shock the reader. Turn off the lights and grab some popcorn because here we have the top 10 scariest creepypastas. Number 10. Slender Man. Slender Man is an alleged paranormal figure purported to have been in existence for centuries, covering a large geographic area. Believers in the Slender Man tie his appearances in with many other legends around the world, including Fear de Boer, the Dark Man, in Scotland, the Dutch Takenman, Branch Man, and the German legend of Der Grossman or Der Grossman, the Tall Man. Appearance. The Slender Man is a being male, in appearance, who looks like a man with extremely long, slender arms and legs. He also appears to have 4 to 8 long, black tentacles that protrude from his back, though different photographs and enthusiasts disagree on this fact, and therefore it is theorized he can contract these tentacles at will. He is described as wearing a black suit strikingly similar to the visage of the notorious Man in Black, and as the name suggests, appears very thin and able to stretch his limbs and torso to inhuman lengths in order to induce fear and ensnare his prey. Once his arms are outstretched, his victims are put into something of a hypnotized state, where they are utterly helpless to stop themselves from walking into them. He is also able to create tendrils from his fingers and back that he uses to walk on in a similar fashion to Dr. Octopus. The superhuman stretching ability could also be seen as a similarity between himself and Mr. Fantastic. Whether he absorbs, kills, or merely takes his victims to an undisclosed location or dimension is also unknown, as there are never any bodies or evidence left behind in his wake to deduce a definite conclusion. His face is pale and slightly ghostly, and almost appears to have been wrapped in a type of gauze or cloth. His facial features are also an object of debate, and many people believe that his face looks different to each person, if it is seen at all. He sometimes is portrayed wears a hat, which is sometimes a bowler, a fedora, or sometimes a top hat. He may also be seen wearing a long flowing necktie or scarf, which is either red or gray. He often keeps his long, pale hands crossed politely behind his back or hanging loosely at his sides. His suit is black, sometimes portrayed as pinstripe in artwork, a common misconception thanks to the very similar Jack Skellington from Nightmare Before Christmas. He has long coat tails which he lets flow proudly. He wears long dress shoes, which are always shined a perfect, gleaming black. Behavior. Much of the fascination with Slender Man is rooted in the overall aura of mystery that he is wrapped in. Despite the fact that it is rumored he kills children almost exclusively, it is difficult to say whether or not his only objective is slaughter. Oftentimes it is either reported or recorded that he can be found in sections of woods, and these generally tend to be suburban. He also has been reported seen with large groups of children, as many photographs portray. It is commonly thought that he resides in woods and forests and preys on children. He seems unconcerned with being exposed in the daylight or captured in photos. It is often thought as well that he enjoys stalking people who become overly paranoid about his existence, purposefully giving them glimpses of himself in order to further frighten them. For this reason, it seems like Slenderman very much enjoys psychologically torturing his victims. He also often appears to float or drift around rather than walk, which suggests the possibility of him being an ethereal being rather than a creature or a man. This would also explain why he is able to remain mobile in spite of his poorly proportioned body. Even though Slender Man was fabricated on something awful forums, some people have already claimed sightings. He is seen mostly at night peering into open windows and walks out in front of lone motorists on secluded roads. His main intentions appear to be kidnapping children, as when he is seen near them in photographs, they usually disappear shortly afterwards. The Slender Man has also inspired many stories, such as those of marble hornets. In the end though, his purpose remains unknown. An interesting take on Slender Man by a pasta member who is relying on the Marble Hornets series for evidence facts. There has been a big misconception about my pal the Slender Man due to the appearance of this article. He does not have hair or a face. Everything else is correct. There is also some questioning as to whether or not there is more than one. I find that unlikely. It's most likely Slendy fucking with your head in order to make you think that there is more than one, which he has been known to do. As of now, Slendy has 3 or 4 known accomplices. These are Hoodie, Masky, the Rake and possibly the Observer. Not much is known yet because the next episode of the Noah Maxwell ARG has not yet been released. In the Marble Hornets ARG, Hoodie and Masky are possibly his followers. In the Everyman Hybrids ARG, the Rake seems to be working with him, but we aren't really sure if that is true or not. Historical references. Brazilian cave paintings. The earliest argued reference to the legend is within the cave paintings found in the Serra da Capivara National Park in the northeast of Brazil, which are believed to date from as far back as 9000 BC. These paintings show a strangely elongated character leading a child by the hand, but make no reference to the extra appendages. Egyptian hieroglyphs. The next known possible reference to the Slender Man comes from around 3100 BC in Lower Egypt, with references to the Thief of the Gods, or the Thief of Kuk, becoming commonplace during the reign of Pharaoh Wasner. Hieroglyphic carvings representing the thief were found in the pharaoh's tomb, who was rumored to have had some kind of encounter with the entity. The carvings resemble a strange figure with multiple upper limbs, one that has never been found in any other hieroglyph language. German woodcuts. Renowned German woodcutter Hans Freckenberg created at least 2 woodcuts, featuring a character he described as Der Ritter, the Knight, during the mid-16th century that were discovered in Helsberg Castle in 1883. Whilst Freckenberg was well known for his realistic depiction of human anatomy, something that was unusual among woodcuts of the time, these pictures featured a skeletal, multi-limbed character. Historians are unsure of the exact symbolic nature of the character, with some claiming that it is a personification of the religious wars that raged in Europe at the time, while others say it represents the mysterious plagues that have been believed to be the reason for the mysterious abandoning of the Hastelberg Castle and the nearby village in 1543. However, many insist that Freckenberg was attempting to represent Der Grossman, the tall man. According to legend, he was a fairy who lived in the Black Forest. Bad children who crept into the woods at night would be relentlessly chased by Der Grossman, who wouldn't leave them be until he either caught them or they were forced to tell their parents of their wrongdoing. Even then, there is a chilling account from an old journal, dating from about 1702, "My child, my Lars, he is gone." Taken from his bed. The only thing that we found was a scrap of black clothing. It feels like cotton, but it is softer, thicker. Lars came into my bedroom yesterday, screaming at the top of his lungs that the angel is outside. I asked him what he was talking about, and he told me some nonsense fairy story about Der Grossman. He said he went into the groves by our village and found one of my cows dead, hanging from a tree. I thought nothing of it at first, but now he is gone. We must find Lars, and my family must leave before we are killed. I am sorry, my son, I should have listened. May God forgive me. Romanian mythology. There is also a Romanian fairy tale which tells the legend of the tall man, featuring this description which may have taken to refer to the Slender Man. The tall man stood in a clearing, dressed as a nobleman, all in black. Shadows lay over him, dark as a cloudy midnight. He had many arms, all long and boneless as snakes, all sharp as swords, and they writhed like worms on nails. He did not speak, but made his intentions known. In the fairy tale, the tall man causes a mother to kill her husband and child, before he slid from a fireplace and clenched her in his burning embrace. English mythology. There is also an English myth referring to the tree man, whom is said to have a slim body with appendages that looks like tree branches. He is only known to be seen in the woods and was used as a story that parents told their children to thwart bad behavior. There have been quite a few disappearances of children that have been said to be linked to the tree man. Number 9. The Rake. During the summer of 2003, events in the northeastern United States involving a strange, human-like creature sparked brief local media interest before an apparent blackout was enacted. Little or no information was left intact, as most online and written accounts of the creature were mysteriously destroyed. Primarily focused in rural New York State and once found in Idaho, self-proclaimed witnesses told stories of their encounters with a creature of unknown origin. Emotions ranged from extremely traumatic levels of fright and discomfort, to an almost childlike sense of playfulness and curiosity. While their published versions are no longer on record, the memories remained powerful. Several of the involved parties began looking for answers that year. In early 2006, the collaboration had accumulated nearly 24 documents dating between the 12th century and present day, spanning 4 continents. In almost all cases, the stories were identical. I've been in contact with a member of this group and was able to get some excerpts from their upcoming book. A Suicide Note, 1964. As I prepare to take my life, I feel it necessary to assuage any guilt or pain I have introduced through this act. It is not the fault of anyone other than him. For once I awoke and felt his presence. And once I awoke and saw his form. Once again I awoke and heard his voice, and looked into his eyes. I cannot sleep without fear of what I might next awake to experience. I cannot ever wake. Goodbye. Found in the same wooden box were 2 empty envelopes addressed to William and Rose, and 1 loose personal letter with no envelope. Dearest Linny, I have prayed for you. He spoke your name. A journal entry, translated from Spanish, 1880. I have experienced the greatest terror. I have experienced the greatest terror. I have experienced the greatest terror. I see his eyes when I close mine. They are hollow. Black. They saw me and pierced me. His wet hand, I will not sleep. His voice, unintelligible text. A mariner's log, 1691. He came to me, in my sleep. From the foot of my bed I felt a sensation. He took everything. We must return to England. We shall not return here again at the request of the Rake. From a witness, 2006. 3 years ago, I had just returned from a trip from Niagara Falls with my family for the 4th of July. We were all very exhausted after a long day of driving, so my husband and I put the kids right to bed and called it a night. At about 4 a.m., I woke up, thinking my husband had gotten up to use the restroom. I used the moment to steal back the sheets, only to wake him in the process. I apologized and told him I thought he got out of bed. When he turned to face me, he gasped and pulled his feet up from the end of the bed so quickly his knee almost knocked me out of the bed. He then grabbed me and said nothing. After adjusting to the dark for a half second, I was able to see what caused the strange reaction. At the foot of the bed, sitting and facing away from us, there was what appeared to be a naked man, or a large hairless dog of some sort. Its body position was disturbing and unnatural, as if it had been hit by a car or something. For some reason, I was not instantly frightened by it, but more concerned as to its condition. At this point I was somewhat under the assumption that we were supposed to help him. My husband was peering over his arm and knee, tucked into the fetal position, occasionally glancing at me before returning to the creature. In a flurry of motion, the creature scrambled around the side of the bed, and then crawled quickly in a flailing sort of motion right along the bed, until it was less than a foot from my husband's face. The creature was completely silent for about 30 seconds, or probably closer to 5. It just seemed like a while, just looking at my husband. The creature then placed its hand on his knee and ran into the hallway, leading to the kids' rooms. I screamed and ran for the light switch, planning to stop him before he hurt my children. When I got to the hallway, the light from the bedroom was enough to see it crouching and hunched over about 20 feet away. He turned around and looked directly at me, covered in blood. I flipped the switch on the wall and saw my daughter Clara. The creature ran down the stairs while my husband and I rushed to help our daughter. She was very badly injured and spoke only once more in her short life. She said, "He is the rake." My husband drove his car into a lake that night, while rushing our daughter to the hospital. They did not survive. Being a small town, news got around pretty quickly. The police were helpful at first, and the local newspaper took a lot of interest as well. However, the story was never published and the local television news never followed up either. For several months, my son Justin and I stayed in a hotel near my parents' house. After we decided to return home, I began looking for answers myself. I eventually located a man in the next town over who had a similar story. We got in contact and began talking about our experiences. He knew of 2 other people in New York who had seen the creature we now referred to as the rake. It took the 4 of us about 2 solid years of hunting on the internet and writing letters to come up with a small collection of what we believed to be accounts of the rake. None of them gave any details, history or follow-up. One journal had an entry involving the creature in its first 3 pages, and never mentioned it again. A ship's log explained nothing of the encounter, saying only that they were told to leave by the rake. That was the last entry in the log. There were, however, many instances where the creature's visit was one of a series of visits with the same person. Multiple people also mentioned being spoken to, my daughter included. This led us to wonder if the rake had visited any of us before our last encounter. I set up a digital recorder near my bed and left it running all night, every night, for 2 weeks. I would tediously scan through the sounds of me rolling around in my bed each day when I woke up. By the end of the 2nd week, I was quite used to the occasional sound of sleep while blurring through the recording at 8 times the normal speed. This still took almost an hour every day. On the first day of the 3rd week, I thought I heard something different. What I found was a shrill voice. It was the rake. I can't listen to it long enough to even begin to transcribe it. I haven't let anyone listen to it yet. All I know is that I've heard it before, and I now believe that it spoke when it was sitting in front of my husband. I don't remember hearing anything at the time, but for some reason, the voice on the recorder immediately brings me back to that moment. The thoughts that must have gone through my daughter's head make me very upset. I have not seen the rake since he ruined my life, but I know that he has been in my room while I slept. I know and fear that one night, I'll wake up to see him staring at me. Number 8. Candle Cove. Candle Cove is a creepy story about an old TV show that some people vaguely remember watching years ago. Net Nostalgia Forum Television, local, Skyshale 33. Candle Cove local, kids show. Does anyone remember this kids show? It was called Candle Cove and I must have been 6 or 7. I never found reference to it anywhere, so I think it was on a local station around 1971 or 1972. I lived in Ironton at the time. I don't remember which station, but I do remember it was on at a weird time, like 4 p.m. Mike Painter 65. Candle Cove local kids show. It seems really familiar to me. I grew up outside of Ashland and was 9 years old in '72. Candle Cove, was it about pirates? I remember a pirate marionette at the mouth of a cave talking to a little girl. Skyshale 33. Candle Cove local kids show. Yes. Okay, I'm not crazy. I remember Pirate Percy. I was always kind of scared of him. He looked like he was built from parts of other dolls, real low budget. His head was an old porcelain baby doll, looked like an antique that didn't belong on the body. I don't remember what station this was. I don't think it was WTSF though. Jaren 2005. Candle Cove, local kids show. Sorry to resurrect this old thread, but I know exactly what show you mean. Sky Shale. I think Candle Cove ran for only a couple months in 71, not 72. I was 12, and I watched it a few times with my brother. It was Channel 58, whatever station that was. My mom would let me switch to it after the news. Let me see what I remember. It took place in Candle Cove, and it was about a little girl who imagined herself to be friends with pirates. The pirate ship was called the Laughingstock, and Pirate Percy wasn't a very good pirate because he got scared too easily. And there was Calliope music constantly playing. Don't remember the girl's name. Janice or Jade or something. Think it was Janice. Skyshale 33. Candle Cove local kids show. Thank you, Jaren. Memories hooded back when you mentioned the Laughingstock and Channel 58. I remember the bow of the ship was a wooden smiling face, with the lower jaw submerged. It looked like it was swallowing the sea, and it had that awful Edwin voice and laugh. I especially remember how jarring it was when they switched from the wooden plastic model to the foam puppet version of the head that talked. Mike Painter 65 Candle Cove local kids show. Haha, I remember now too. Do you remember this part? Skyshale, you have to go inside. Skyshale 33. Candle Cove local kids show. Ugh, Mike, I got a chill reading that. Yes, I remember. That's what the ship always told Percy when there was a spooky place he had to go in, like a cave or a dark room where the treasure was. And the camera would push in on Laughingstock's face with each pause. You have to go inside. With his two eyes askew and that flopping foam jaw and the fishing line that opened and closed it. Ugh. It just looked so cheap and awful. You guys remember the villain? He had a face that was just a handlebar mustache above really tall, narrow teeth. Kevin Hart. Candle Cove local kids show. I honestly thought the villain was Pirate Percy. I was about 5 when this show was on Nightmare Fuel. Jaren 2005. Candle Cove local kids show. That wasn't the villain, the puppet with the mustache. That was the villain's sidekick, Horace Horrible. He had a monocle too, but it was on top of the mustache. I used to think that meant he had only one eye. But yeah, the villain was another marionette. The Skin Taker. I can't believe what they let us watch back then. Kevin Hart. Candle Cove local kids show. Jesus H. Christ, the Skin Taker. What kind of a kids show were we watching? I seriously could not look at the screen when the Skin Taker showed up. He just descended out of nowhere on his strings, just a dirty skeleton wearing that brown top hat and cape and his glass eyes that were too big for his skull. Christ almighty. Skyshale 33. Candle Cove local kids show. Wasn't his top hat and cloak all sewn up crazily? Was that supposed to be children's skin? Mike Painter 65. Candle Cove local kids show. Yeah, I think so. Remember, his mouth didn't open and close, his jaw just slid back and forth. I remember the little girl said, "Why does your mouth move like that?" And the Skin Taker didn't look at the girl but at the camera and said to grind your skin. Skyshale 33. Candle Cove local kids show. I'm so relieved that other people remember this terrible show. I used to have this awful memory, a bad dream I had where the opening jingle ended, the show faded in from black, and all the characters were there, but the camera was just cutting to each of their faces, and they were just screaming, and the puppets and marionettes were flailing spastically, and just all screaming. The girl was just moaning and crying like she had been through hours of this. I woke up many times from that nightmare. I used to wet the bed when I had it. Kevin Hart. Candle Cove local kids show. I don't think that was a dream. I remember that. I remember that was an episode. Skyshale 33. Candle Cove local kids show. No, Not possible. There was no plot or anything. I mean literally just standing in place crying and screaming for the whole show. Kevin Hart. Candle Cove Local Kids Show? Maybe I'm manufacturing the memory because you said that, but I swear to God I remember seeing what you described. They just screamed. Jaron 2005. Candle Cove Local Kids Show? Oh God. Yes. The little girl, Janice, I remember seeing her shake. And the skin taker screaming through his gnashing teeth, his jaw careening so wildly I thought it would come off its wire hinges. I turned it off and it was the last time I watched. I ran to tell my brother and we didn't have the courage to turn it back on. Mike Painter 65. Candle Cove Local Kids Show? I visited my mom today at the nursing home. I asked her about when I was little in the early 70s, when I was 8 or 9, and if she remembered a kids show, Candle Cove. She said she was surprised I could remember that, and I asked why, and she said because I used to think it was so strange that you said I'm gonna go watch Candle Cove now mom, and then you would tune the TV to static and just watch dead air for 30 minutes. You had a big imagination with your little pirate show. Number 7. Username 666. YouTube is a remembered piece of history. Back then in 2006, not much was known, and all that you can see in the community were just people uploading cat videos. But one particular user has caused enough controversy to be called. The channel had posted a ton of gore porn and blood fetish that the user was recently removed for playing with the TOS, but it can still be accessed. One day, a person on YouTube has posted their experience with the channel from a defunct blogging website. I worked for YouTube during 2006. I was a busy worker, and I recently upload videos here. What I didn't know that some of the YouTube moderators suspended a YouTube account. I told them what it was, but they wouldn't want me to. I was wondering why I wasn't allowed to go on that page, rather than what it was. But just then, one of the moderators handed me a piece of paper with a writing on it. It was a link. He pleaded me not to ask us about the secret username ever again. The link was a YouTube user link. It said, www.youtube.com/666. I went home after work and typed it on my computer. I found out that the account was suspended, so it's no worry. But when I refreshed the pages several times, some things changed. All of the video tags turned into the letters X666, and every single text in the screen said 666. I thought someone was hacking my computer, but I denied it and then refreshed it. Just then, a channel popped up. It was 666's channel. I looked at some of the videos. Most of them were crazy. One video contained 4 babies twisting their head. Another video showed swirled graphics. I decided to get off the video and went to another one, but a blank pop-up was shown. I clicked the blank button, and it took me to another video by 666. The video was shown a woman drowning in a blood pool and disgusting things happening. I thought this was disgusting, so I decided to pause the video. It didn't let me, because it wasn't responding. I decided then to close Internet Explorer, but it wouldn't budge. I also tried to go to another video too, but it didn't work either. I thought there was no way out, until I thought the shutdown button. Of course, I decided to shut down my computer so that the virus wouldn't get through my computer again, but the button wouldn't work. Shutdown buttons respond all the time. I knew that I was hacked. All hope was lost. I couldn't get out of Explorer, and the video kept going on. And there was nothing to stop me. The girl in the video kept staring at me, looking at me with random sounds and beatings playing. Just then, the woman from the video's hand popped out of the video and crashed my Internet Explorer. After a few days, I was recently fired after going through that horrid experience with 666's channel. That's when I thought of this. Could this actually been made by the devil? Was it a joke to scare YouTubers? Either way, this myth was very mysterious. I haven't gone through sleep after watching those videos. I wonder who made them. This blogspot was then defunct after 2 days when the blog was done. When anyone enters the blog, a message would pop up saying removed by admin. Error code 666. The blogger has sent me his experience by email, asking me to post this on this website. He also left a note. Never go nor refresh username 666. Once you have finished, it will never stop. It won't come out. I hope no one has ever tried this. Number 6. Blind Maiden. There is a website that offers its users the choice to experience the ultimate horror. This website, called blindmaiden.com, is supposedly a site dedicated to a doomed spirit that will enter the home of people who have viewed it. However, no matter how hard you try, your browser won't allow you to enter the site. You see, to access this site, you must wait until exactly 12 a.m., making sure that the night in question is a new moon night. You must be on your own in your home with all the lights turned off. Only when these conditions are met will you be granted access to the site. As soon as you enter, you will see a montage of pictures being displayed quickly. These images are of boys and girls without eyes and faces that are twisted in tremendous fear. After that, text will appear on the monitor saying, "This website will take you to a whole new level of horror. A horror that will use all 5 of your senses. You must be very careful not to click on anything by accident. You will be faced with a real experience of absolute horror. Click the accept button to engage actively in the experience. Accept decline. If you click decline, you will be rewarded with access to the entire archive of these gruesome images, a gore site pretty much. Click accept, however, and there will be no turning back. You have sealed your fate, and trust me, you will experience the ultimate horror. Upon accepting, you will see a sinister silhouette walking towards your home on your monitor. The spirit will then approach and enter the same room as you are in. You will then see your own back on the monitor and you will feel a presence behind you. Suddenly, you will feel somebody tapping on your shoulder, and as you turn around, you will see the blind maiden's face and scream in terror. And that will be the last thing you will do, as she will then kill you. The blind maiden will then pluck your eyes out and take a photo of your face. Congratulations! You have successfully completed the ritual, and as a reward, that photo will forever be a part of the website's picture gallery, just like all the other photos of people who were stupid or curious enough to press the accept button. And, yes, if you are a thrill seeker, then you will love the last few moments of your life. Number 5. Smile Dog. Smile Dog's story consists of a classic horror setup. An amateur writer visits the house of a lady who supposedly has a story for which he can borrow from. Rather than speak, however, the lady has locked herself up in her room, crying and ranting about nightmares and visions and various other problems. All of these center around a floppy disk she had been given that contained the image Smile JPG, which is Smile Dog. Other cases of this have cropped up. Viewing this image incites insanity, and no copy of the exact image exists on the web, though likenesses of it do. The true image of Smile JPG is recognized due to the effect it has on the viewer, that is, they wind up dead. Attaching the file, that is, spreading the word, is the only way to save oneself from the Smile Dog that appears in one's dreams demanding to spread the word. Some say that the original legend began with an image of the devil. I first met in person with Mary E. in the summer of 2007. I had arranged with her husband of 15 years, Terrence, to see her for an interview. Mary had initially agreed, since I was not a newsman but rather an amateur writer gathering information for a few early college assignments and, if all went according to plan, some pieces of fiction. We scheduled the interview for a particular weekend when I was in Chicago on unrelated business, but at the last moment Mary changed her mind and locked herself in the couple's bedroom, refusing to meet with me. For half an hour I sat with Terrence as we camped outside the bedroom door, I listening and taking notes while he attempted fruitlessly to calm his wife. The things Mary said made little sense but fit with a pattern I was expecting. Though I could not see her, I could tell from her voice that she was crying, and more often than not her objections to speaking with me centered around an incoherent diatribe on her dreams, her nightmares. Terrence apologized profusely when we ceased the exercise, and I did my best to take it in stride. Recall that I wasn't a reporter in search of a story, but merely a curious young man in search of information. Besides, I thought at the time, I could perhaps find another, similar case if I put my mind and resources to it. Mary E. was the CISO for a small Chicago-based bulletin board system in 1992 when she first encountered Smile JPG and her life changed forever. She and Terrence had been married for only 5 months. Mary was one of an estimated 400 people who saw the image when it was posted as a hyperlink on the BBS, though she is the only one who has spoken openly about the experience. The rest have remained anonymous, or are perhaps dead. In 2005, when I was only in 10th grade, Smile JPG was first brought to my attention by my burgeoning interest in web-based phenomena. Mary was the most often cited victim of what is sometimes referred to as Smile Dog. The being Smile JPG is reputed to display what caught my interest other than the obvious macabre elements of the cyber legend, and my proclivity towards such things was the sheer lack of information, usually to the point that people don't believe it even exists other than as a rumor or hoax. It is unique because, though the entire phenomenon centers on a picture file, that file is nowhere to be found on the internet. Certainly many photo-manipulated simulacra litter the web, showing up with the most frequency on sites such as the Amagboard 4chan, particularly the X-focused paranormal subboard. It is suspected these are fakes because they do not have the effect the true Smile JPG is believed to have, namely sudden onset temporal lobe epilepsy and acute anxiety. This purported reaction in the viewer is one of the reasons the phantom-like Smile JPG is regarded with such disdain, since it is patently absurd, though depending on whom you ask the reluctance to acknowledge Smile JPG's existence might be just as much out of fear as it is out of disbelief. Neither Smile JPG nor Smile Dog is mentioned anywhere on Wikipedia, though the website features articles on such other, perhaps more scandalous shock sites as Hello JPG, or Two Girls One Cup. Any attempt to create a page pertaining to Smile JPG is summarily deleted by any of the encyclopedia's many admins. Encounters with Smile JPG are the stuff of internet legend. Mary E.'s story is not unique. There are unverified rumors of Smile JPG showing up in the early days of Usenet, and even one persistent tale that in 2002 a hacker flooded the forums of humor and satire website Something Awful with a deluge of Smile Dog pictures, rendering almost half the forum's users at the time epileptic. It is also said that in the mid to late 90s that Smile JPG circulated on Usenet and as an attachment of a chain email with the subject line, "Smile. God loves you." Yet despite the huge exposure these stunts would generate, there are very few people who admit to having experienced any of them, and no trace of the file or any link has ever been discovered. Those who claim to have seen Smile JPG often weakly joke that they were far too busy to save a copy of the picture to their hard drive. However, all alleged victims offer the same description of the photo: a dog-like creature, usually described as appearing similar to a Siberian husky, illuminated by the flash of the camera, sits in a dim room, the only background detail that is visible being a human hand extending from the darkness near the left side of the frame. The hand is empty, but is usually described as beckoning. Of course, most attention is given to the dog or dog creature, as some victims are more certain than others about what they claim to have seen. The muzzle of the beast is reputedly split in a wide grin, revealing 2 rows of very white, very straight, very sharp, very human-looking teeth. This is, of course, not a description given immediately after viewing the picture, but rather a recollection of the victims, who claim to have seen the picture endlessly repeated in their mind's eye during the time they are, in reality, having epileptic fits. These fits are reported to continue indeterminably, often while the victims sleep, resulting in very vivid and disturbing nightmares. These may be treated with medication, though in some cases it is more effective than others. Mary E., I assumed, was not on effective medication. That was why after my visit to her apartment in 2007 I sent out feelers to several folklore and urban legend-oriented newsgroups, websites, and mailing lists, hoping to find the name of a supposed victim of Smile JPG who felt more interested in talking about his experiences. For a time, nothing happened, and at length I forgot completely about my pursuits, since I had begun my freshman year of college and was quite busy. Mary contacted me via email, however, near the beginning of March 2008. Dear Mr. L., I am incredibly sorry about my behavior last summer when you came to interview me. I hope you understand that it was no fault of yours, but rather my own problems that led me to act out as I did. I realize that I could have handled the situation more decorously. However, I hope you will forgive me. At the time, I was afraid. You see, for 15 years I have been haunted by Smile JPG. Smile Dog comes to me in my sleep every night. I know that sounds silly, but it is true. There is an ineffable quality about my dreams, my nightmares, that makes them completely unlike any real dreams I have ever had. I do not move and do not speak. I simply look ahead, and the only thing ahead of me is the scene from that horrible picture. I see the beckoning hand, and I see Smile Dog. It talks to me. It is not a dog, of course, though I am not quite sure what it really is. It tells me it will leave me alone if only I do as it asks. All I must do, it says, is spread the word. That is how it phrases its demands. And I know exactly what it means. It wants me to show it to someone else. And I could. The week after my incident, I received in the mail a manila envelope with no return address. Inside was only a 3 1/2-inch floppy diskette. Without having to check, I knew precisely what was on it. I thought for a long time about my options. I could show it to a stranger, a co-worker. I could even show it to Terrence, as much as the idea disgusted me. And what would happen then? Well, if Smile Dog kept its word, I could sleep. Yet if it lied, what would I do? And who was to say something worse would not come for me if I did as the creature asked? So I did nothing for 15 years, though I kept the diskette hidden amongst my things. Every night for 15 years Smile Dog has come to me in my sleep and demanded that I spread the word. For 15 years I have stood strong, though there have been hard times. Many of my fellow victims on the BBS board where I first encountered Smile JPG stopped posting. I heard some of them committed suicide. Others remained completely silent, simply disappearing off the face of the web. They are the ones I worry about the most. I sincerely hope you will forgive me, Mr. L., but last summer when you contacted me and my husband about an interview, I was near the breaking point. I decided I was going to give you the floppy diskette. I did not care if Smile Dog was lying or not. I wanted it to end. You were a stranger, someone I had no connection with, and I thought I would not feel sorrow when you took the diskette as part of your research and sealed your fate. Before you arrived, I realized what I was doing was plotting to ruin your life. I could not stand the thought, and in fact I still cannot. I am ashamed, Mr. L., and I hope that this warning will dissuade you from further investigation of Smile JPG. You may in time encounter someone who is, if not weaker than I, then wholly more depraved, someone who will not hesitate to follow Smile Dog's orders. Stop while you are still whole. Sincerely, Mary E. Terrence contacted me later that month with the news that his wife had killed herself. While cleaning up the various things she'd left behind, closing email accounts, and the like, he happened upon the above message. He was a man in shambles. He wept as he told me to listen to his wife's advice. He'd found the diskette, he revealed, and burned it until it was nothing but a stinking pile of blackened plastic. The part that most disturbed him, however, was how the diskette had hissed as it melted. Like some sort of animal, he said. I will admit that I was a little uncertain about how to respond to this. At first I thought perhaps it was a joke, with the couple belatedly playing with the situation in order to get a rise out of me. A quick check of several Chicago newspapers' online obituaries, however, proved that Mary E. was indeed dead. There was, of course, no mention of suicide in the article. I decided that, for a time at least, I would not further pursue the subject of Smile JPG, especially since I had finals coming up at the end of May. But the world has odd ways of testing us. Almost a full year after I'd returned from my disastrous interview with Mary E., I received another email. Hello, I found your email address through a mailing list. Your profile said you are interested in Smile Dog. I have saw it. It is not as bad as everyone says. I have sent it to you here, just spreading the word. The final line chilled me to the bone. According to my email client, there was one file attachment called, naturally, Smile JPG. I considered downloading it for some time. It was mostly likely a fake, I imagined, and even if it weren't, I was never wholly convinced of Smile JPG's peculiar powers. Mary E.'s account had shaken me, yes, but she was probably mentally unbalanced anyway. After all, how could a simple image do what Smile JPG was said to accomplish? What sort of creature was it that could break one's mind with only the power of the eye? And if such things were patently absurd, then why did the legend exist at all? If I downloaded the image, if I looked at it, and if Mary turned out to be correct, if Smile Dog came to me in my dreams demanding I spread the word, what would I do? Would I live my life as Mary had, fighting against the urge to give in until I died? Or would I simply spread the word, eager to be put to rest? And if I chose the latter route, how could I do it? Whom would I burden in turn? If I went through with my earlier intention to write a short article about Smile JPG, I decided I could attach it as evidence. And anyone who read the article, anyone who took interest, would be affected. And even assuming the Smile JPG attached to the email was genuine, would I be capricious enough to save myself in that manner? Could I spread the word? Yes, I could. Number 4. Squidward's suicide. I just want to start off by saying, if you want an answer at the end, prepare to be disappointed. There just isn't one. I was an intern at Nickelodeon Studios for a year in 2005 for my degree in animation. It wasn't paid, of course. Most internships aren't, but it did have some perks beyond education. To adults it might not seem like a big one, but most kids at the time would shit themselves over it. Now, since I worked directly with the editors and animators, I got to view the new episodes days before they aired. I'll get right to it without giving too many unnecessary details. They had very recently made a SpongeBob movie and the entire staff was somewhat sapped of creativity, so it took them longer to start up the season. But the delay lasted longer for more upsetting reasons. There was a problem with the Series 4 premiere that set everyone and everything back for several months. Me and 2 other interns were in the editing room along with the lead animators and sound editors for the final cut. We received the copy that was supposed to be Fear of a Krabby Patty, and gathered around the screen to watch. Now, given that it isn't final yet, animators often put up a mock title card, sort of an inside joke for us, with phony, oftentimes lewd titles, such as, How sex doesn't work instead of Rockabye by Valve, when SpongeBob and Patrick adopt a sea scallop. Nothing particularly funny but work-related chuckles. So when we saw the title card Squidward's Suicide, we didn't think it more than a morbid joke. One of the interns did a small throat laugh at it. The happy-go-lucky music plays as is normal. The story began with Squidward practicing his clarinet, hitting a few sour notes like normal. We hear SpongeBob laughing outside and Squidward stops, yelling at him to keep it down as he has a concert that night and needs to practice. SpongeBob says okay and goes to see Sandy with Patrick. The bubbles splash, screen comes up and we see the ending of Squidward's concert. This is when things began to seem off. While playing, a few frames repeat themselves, but the sound doesn't at this point. Sound is synced up with animation, so, yes, that's not common, but when he stops playing, the sound finishes as if the skip never happened. There is slight murmuring in the crowd before they begin to boo him. Not normal cartoon booing that is common in the show, but you could very clearly hear malice in it. Squidward's in full frame and looks visibly afraid. The shot goes to the crowd, with SpongeBob in center frame, and he too is booing, very much unlike him. That isn't the oddest thing, though. What is odd is everyone had hyper-realistic eyes. Very detailed. Clearly not shots of real people's eyes, but something a bit more real than CGI. The pupils were red. Some of us looked at each other, obviously confused, but since we weren't the writers, we didn't question its appeal to children yet. The shot goes to Squidward sitting on the edge of his bed, looking very forlorn. The view out of his porthole window is of a night sky, so it isn't very long after the concert. The unsettling part is at this point there is no sound. Literally no sound, not even the feedback from the speakers in the room. It's as if the speakers were turned off, though their status showed them working perfectly. He just sat there, blinking, in this silence for about 30 seconds, then he started to sob softly. He put his hands, tentacles, over his eyes and cried quietly for a full minute more, all the while a sound in the background very slowly growing from nothing to barely audible. It sounded like a slight breeze through a forest. The screen slowly begins to zoom in on his face. By slow I mean it's only noticeable if you look at shots 10 seconds apart side by side. His sobbing gets louder, more full of hurt and anger. The screen then twitches a bit, as if it twists in on itself, for a split second then back to normal. The whine through the tree sound gets slowly louder and more severe, as if a storm is brewing somewhere. The eerie part is, this sound, and Squidward's sobbing, sounded real, as if the sound wasn't coming from the speakers but as if the speakers were holes the sound was coming through from the other side. As good as sound as the studio likes to have, they don't purchase the equipment to be that good to produce sound of that quality. Below the sound of the wind and sobbing, very faint, something sounded like laughing. It came at odd intervals and never lasted more than a second, so you had a hard time pinning it. We watched this show twice, so pardon me if things sound too specific, but I've had time to think about them. After 30 seconds of this, the screen blurred and twitched violently and something flashed over the screen, as if a single frame was replaced. The lead animation editor paused and rewound, frame by frame. What we saw was horrible. It was a still photo of a dead child. He couldn't have been more than 6. The face was mangled and bloodied, one eye dangling over his upturned face, popped. He was naked down to his underwear, his stomach crudely cut open and his entrails laying beside him. He was laying on some pavement that was probably a road. The most upsetting part was that there was a shadow of the photographer. There was no crime tape, no evidence tags or markers, and the angle was completely off for a shot designed to be evidence. It would seem the photographer was the person responsible for the child's death. We were of course mortified, but pressed on, hoping that it was just a sick joke. The screen flipped back to Squidward, still sobbing, louder than before, and half body in frame. There was now what appeared to be blood running down his face from his eyes. The blood was also done in a hyper-realistic style, looking as if you touched it you'd get blood on your fingers. The wind sounded now as if it were that of a gale blowing through the forest. There were even snapping sounds of branches. The laughing, a deep baritone, lasting at longer intervals and coming more frequently. After about 20 seconds, the screen again twisted and showed a single-frame photo. The editor was reluctant to go back, we all were, but he knew he had to. This time the photo was that of what appeared to be a little girl, no older than the first child. She was laying on her stomach, her barrettes in a pool of blood next to her. Her left eye was too popped out and popped, naked except for underpants. Her entrails were piled on top of her above another crude cut along her back. Again the body was on the street and the photographer's shadow was visible, very similar in size and shape to the first. I had to choke back vomit and one in turn, the only female in the room, ran out. The show resumed. About 5 seconds after this second photo played, Squidward went silent, as did all sound, like it was when this scene started. He put his tentacles down and his eyes were now done in hyper-realism like the others were in the beginning of this episode. They were bleeding, bloodshot, and pulsating. He just stared at the screen, as if watching the viewer. After about 10 seconds, he started sobbing, this time not covering his eyes. The sound was piercing and loud, and most fear-inducing of all, is his sobbing was mixed with screams. Tears and blood were dripping down his face at a heavy rate. The wind sound came back, and so did the deep-voiced laughing, and this time, the still photo lasted for a good 5 frames. The animator was able to stop it on the 4th, and backed up. This time the photo was of a boy, about the same age, but this time the scene was different. The entrails were just being pulled out from a stomach wound by a large hand, the right eye popped and dangling, blood trickling down it. The animator proceeded. It was hard to believe, but the next one was different but we couldn't tell what. He went on to the next, same thing. He went back to the first and played them quicker and I lost it. I vomited on the floor, the animating and sound editors gasping at the screen. The 5 frames were not as if they were 5 different photos, they were played out as if they were frames from a video. We saw the hand slowly lift out the guts, we saw the kid's eyes focus on it, we even saw 2 frames of the kid beginning to blink. The lead sound editor told us to stop, he had to call in the creator to see this. Mr. Hillenberg arrived within about 15 minutes. He was confused as to why he was called down there, so the editor just continued the episode. Once the few frames were shown, all screaming, all sound again stopped. Squidward was just staring at the viewer, full frame of the face, for about 3 seconds. The shot quickly panned out and that deep voice said "Do-it," and we see, in Squidward's hands a shotgun. He immediately puts the gun in his mouth and pulls the trigger. Realistic blood and brain matter spatters the wall behind him, and his bed, and he flies back with the force. The last 5 seconds of this episode show his body on the bed, on his side, one eye dangling on what's left of his head above the floor, staring blankly at it. Then the episode ends. Mr. Hillenberg is obviously angry at this. He demanded to know what the hell was going on. Most people left the room at this point, so it was just a handful of us to watch it again. Viewing the episode twice only served to imprint the entirety of it in my mind and cause me horrible nightmares. I'm sorry I stayed. The only theory we could think of was the file was edited by someone in the chain from the drawing studio to here. The CTO was called in to analyze when it happened. The analysis of the file did show it was edited over by new material. However, the timestamp of it was a mere 24 seconds before we began viewing it. All equipment involved was examined for foreign software and hardware as well as glitches, as if the timestamp may have glitched and showed the wrong time, but everything checked out fine. We don't know what happened and to this day nobody does. There was an investigation due to the nature of the photos, but nothing came of it. No child scene was identified and no clues were gathered from the data involved nor physical clues in the photos. I never believed in unexplainable phenomena before, but now that I have something happen and can't prove anything about it beyond anecdotal evidence, I think twice about things. Number 3. The Russian sleep experiment. Russian researchers in the late 1940s kept 5 people awake for 15 days using an experimental gas-based stimulant. They were kept in a sealed environment to carefully monitor their oxygen intake so the gas didn't kill them, since it was toxic in high concentrations. This was before closed-circuit cameras, so they had only microphones and 5-inch thick glass porthole-sized windows into the chamber to monitor them. The chamber was stocked with books, cots to sleep on but no bedding, running water and toilet, and enough dried food to last all 5 for over a month. The test subjects were political prisoners deemed enemies of the state during World War II. Everything was fine for the first 5 days. The subjects hardly complained, having been promised, falsely, that they would be freed if they submitted to the test and did not sleep for 30 days. Their conversations and activities were monitored, and it was noted that they continued to talk about increasingly traumatic incidents in their past, and the general tone of their conversations took on a darker aspect after the 4-day mark. After 5 days they started to complain about the circumstances and events that lead them to where they were, and started to demonstrate severe paranoia. They stopped talking to each other and began alternately whispering to the microphones and one-way mirrored portholes. Oddly, they all seemed to think they could win the trust of the experimenters by turning over their comrades, the other subjects in captivity with them. At first the researchers suspected this was an effect of the gas itself. After 9 days the first of them started screaming. He ran the length of the chamber repeatedly yelling at the top of his lungs for 3 hours straight. He continued attempting to scream but was only able to produce occasional squeaks. The researchers postulated that he had physically torn his vocal cords. The most surprising thing about this behavior is how the other captives reacted to it. Or rather, didn't react to it. They continued whispering to the microphones until the second of the captives started to scream. The 2 non-screaming captives took the books apart, smeared page after page with their own feces and pasted them calmly over the glass portholes. The screaming promptly stopped. So did the whispering to the microphones. After 3 more days passed, the researchers checked the microphones hourly to make sure they were working, since they thought it impossible that no sound could be coming with 5 people inside. The oxygen consumption in the chamber indicated that all 5 must still be alive. In fact, it was the amount of oxygen 5 people would consume at a very heavy level of strenuous exercise. On the morning of the 14th day, the researchers did something they said they would not do to get a reaction from the captives. They used the intercom inside the chamber, hoping to provoke any response from the captives they were afraid were either dead or vegetables. They announced, "We are opening the chamber to test the microphones. Step away from the door and lie flat on the floor or you will be shot. Compliance will earn one of you your immediate freedom." To their surprise, they heard a single phrase in a calm voice response, "We no longer want to be freed." Debate broke out among the researchers and the military forces funding the research. Unable to provoke any more response using the intercom, it was finally decided to open the chamber at midnight on the 15th day. The chamber was flushed of the stimulant gas and filled with fresh air, and immediately voices from the microphones began to object. 3 different voices began begging, as if pleading for the life of loved ones, to turn the gas back on. The chamber was opened, and soldiers sent in to retrieve the test subjects. They began to scream louder than ever, and so did the soldiers when they saw what was inside. 4 of the 5 subjects were still alive, although no one could rightly call the state that any of them in life. The food rations past day 5 had not been so much as touched. There were chunks of meat from The dead test subject's thighs and chest stuffed into the drain in the center of the chamber, blocking the drain and allowing 4 inches of water to accumulate on the floor. Precisely how much of the water on the floor was actually blood was never determined. All 4 surviving test subjects also had large portions of muscle and skin torn away from their bodies. The destruction of flesh and exposed bone on their fingertips indicated that the wounds were inflicted by hand, not with teeth as the researchers initially thought. Closer examination of the position and angles of the wounds indicated that most, if not all of them, were self-inflicted. The abdominal organs below the ribcage of all 4 test subjects had been removed. While the heart, lungs and diaphragm remained in place, the skin and most of the muscles attached to the ribs had been ripped off, exposing the lungs through the ribcage. All the blood vessels and organs remained intact. They had just been taken out and laid on the floor, fanning out around the eviscerated but still living bodies of the subjects. The digestive tract of all 4 could be seen to be working, digesting food. It quickly became apparent that what they were digesting was their own flesh that they had ripped off and eaten over the course of days. Most of the soldiers were Russian special operatives at the facility, but still many refused to return to the chamber to remove the test subjects. They continued to scream to be left in the chamber and alternately begged and demanded that the gas be turned back on, lest they fall asleep. To everyone's surprise, the test subjects put up a fierce fight in the process of being removed from the chamber. One of the Russian soldiers died from having his throat ripped out. Another was gravely injured by having his testicles ripped off and an artery in his leg severed by one of the subject's teeth. Another 5 of the soldiers lost their lives if you count ones that committed suicide in the weeks following the incident. In the struggle, one of the 4 living subjects had his spleen ruptured and he bled out almost immediately. The medical researchers attempted to sedate him, but this proved impossible. He was injected with more than 10 times the human dose of a morphine derivative and still fought like a cornered animal, breaking the ribs and arm of one doctor. When heart was seen to beat for a full 2 minutes after he had bled out to the point there was more air in his vascular system than blood. Even after it stopped, he continued to scream and flail for another 3 minutes, struggling to attack anyone in reach and just repeating the word more over and over, weaker and weaker, until he finally fell silent. The surviving 3 test subjects were heavily restrained and moved to a medical facility, the 2 with intact vocal cords continuously begging for the gas, demanding to be kept awake. The most injured of the 3 was taken to the only surgical operating room that the facility had. In the process of preparing the subject to have his organs placed back within his body, it was found that he was effectively immune to the sedative they had given him to prepare him for the surgery. He fought furiously against his restraints when the anesthetic gas was brought out to put him under. He managed to tear most of the way through a 4-inch wide leather strap on one wrist, even through the weight of a 200-pound soldier holding that wrist as well. It took only a little more anesthetic than normal to put him under, and the instant his eyelids fluttered and closed, his heart stopped. In the autopsy of the test subject that died on the operating table, it was found that his blood had tripled the normal level of oxygen. His muscles that were still attached to his skeleton were badly torn, and he had broken 9 bones in his struggle to not be subdued. Most of them were from the force his own muscles had exerted on them. The second survivor had been the first of the group of 5 to start screaming. His vocal cords destroyed, he was unable to beg or object to surgery, and he only reacted by shaking his head violently in disapproval when the anesthetic gas was brought near him. He shook his head yes when someone suggested, reluctantly, they try the surgery without anesthetic, and did not react for the entire 6-hour procedure of replacing his abdominal organs and attempting to cover them with what remained of his skin. The surgeon presiding stated repeatedly that it should be medically possible for the patient to still be alive. One terrified nurse assisting the surgery stated that she had seen the patient's mouth curl into a smile several times whenever his eyes met hers. When the surgery ended, the subject looked at the surgeon and began to wheeze loudly, attempting to talk while struggling. Assuming this must be something of drastic importance, the surgeon had a pen and pad fetched so the patient could write his message. It was simple. Keep cutting. The other two test subjects were given the same surgery, both without anesthetic as well. Although they had to be injected with a paralytic for the duration of the operation. The surgeon found it impossible to perform the operation while the patients laughed continuously. Once paralyzed, the subjects could only follow the attending researchers with their eyes. The paralytic cleared their system in an abnormally short period of time, and they were soon trying to escape their bonds. The moment they could speak, they were again asking for the stimulant gas. The researchers tried asking why they had injured themselves, why they had ripped out their own guts, and why they wanted to be given the gas again. Only one response was given: "I must remain awake." All three subjects' restraints were reinforced and they were placed back into the chamber awaiting determination as to what should be done with them. The researchers, facing the wrath of their military benefactors for having failed the stated goals of their project, considered euthanizing the surviving subjects. The commanding officer, an ex-KGB, instead saw potential and wanted to see what would happen if they were put back on the gas. The researchers strongly objected, but were overruled. In preparation for being sealed in the chamber again, the subjects were connected to an EEG monitor and had their restraints padded for long-term confinement. To everyone's surprise, all three stopped struggling the moment it was let slip that they were going back on the gas. It was obvious that at this point all three were putting up a great struggle to stay awake. One of subjects that could speak was humming loudly and continuously. The mute subject was straining his legs against the leather bonds with all his might, first left, then right, then left again for something to focus on. The remaining subject was holding his head off his pillow and blinking rapidly. Having been the first to be wired for EEG, most of the researchers were monitoring his brain waves in surprise. They were normal most of the time, but sometimes flatlined inexplicably. It looked as if he were repeatedly suffering brain death before returning to normal. As they focused on paper scrolling out of the brainwave monitor, only one nurse saw his eyes slip shut at the same moment his head hit the pillow. His brainwaves immediately changed to that of deep sleep, then flatlined for the last time, as his heart simultaneously stopped. The only remaining subject that could speak started screaming to be sealed in now. His brainwaves showed the same flatlines as one who had just died from falling asleep. The commander gave the order to seal the chamber with both subjects inside, as well as three researchers. One of the named three immediately drew his gun and shot the commander point blank between the eyes, then turned the gun on the mute subject and blew his brains out as well. He pointed his gun at the remaining subject, still restrained to a bed, as the remaining members of the medical and research team fled the room. "I won't be locked in here with these things. Not with you," he screamed at the man strapped to the table. "What are you?" he demanded. "I must know." The subject smiled. "Have you forgotten so easily?" The subject asked. "We are you. We are the madness that lurks within you all, begging to be free at every moment in your deepest animal mind. We are what you hide from in your beds every night. We are what you sedate into silence and paralysis when you go to the nocturnal haven where we cannot tread." The researcher paused, then aimed at the subject's heart and fired. The EEG flatlined as the subject weakly choked out, "So nearly free." Number 2. The Smiling Man. About 5 years ago, I lived downtown in a major city in the U.S. I've always been a night person, so I would often find myself bored after my roommate, who was decidedly not a night person, went to sleep. To pass the time, I used to go for long walks and spend the time thinking. I spent 4 years like that, walking alone at night, and never once had a reason to feel afraid. I always used to joke with my roommate that even the drug dealers in the city were polite. But all of that changed in just a few minutes of one evening. It was a Wednesday, somewhere between 1 and 2 in the morning, and I was walking near a police-patrolled park quite a ways from my apartment. It was a quiet night, even for a weeknight, with very little traffic and almost no one on foot. The park, as it was most nights, was completely empty. I turned down a short side street in order to loop back to my apartment when I first noticed him. At the far end of the street, on my side, was the silhouette of a man, dancing. It was a strange dance, similar to a waltz, but he finished each box with an odd forward stride. I guess you could say he was dance walking, headed straight for me. Deciding he was probably drunk, I stepped as close as I could to the road, to give him the majority of the sidewalk to pass me by. The closer he got, the more I realized how gracefully he was moving. He was very tall and lanky, and wearing an old suit. He danced closer still, until I could make out his face. His eyes were open wide and wild, head tilted back slightly, looking off at the sky. His mouth was formed in a painfully wide cartoon of a smile. Between the eyes and the smile, I decided to cross the street before he danced any closer. I took my eyes off of him to cross the empty street. As I've reached the other side, I glanced back, and then stopped dead in my tracks. He had stopped dancing and was standing with one foot in the street, perfectly parallel to me. He was facing me but still looking skyward, smile still wide on his lips. I was completely and utterly unnerved by this. I started walking again, but kept my eyes on the man. He didn't move. Once I had put about half a block between us, I turned away from him for a moment to watch the sidewalk in front of me. The street and sidewalk ahead of me were completely empty. Still unnerved, I looked back to where he had been standing to find him gone. For the briefest of moments I felt relieved, until I noticed him. He had crossed the street, and was now slightly crouched down. I couldn't tell for sure due to the distance and the shadows, but I was certain he was facing me. I had looked away from him for no more than 10 seconds, so it was clear that he had moved fast. I was so shocked that I stood there for some time, staring at him. And then he started moving toward me again. He took giant, exaggerated tiptoed steps, as if he were a cartoon character sneaking up on someone. Except he was moving very, very quickly. I'd like to say at this point I ran away, or pulled out my pepper spray or my cell phone or anything at all, but I didn't. I just stood there, completely frozen as the smiling man crept toward me. And then he stopped, again, about a car length away from me. Still smiling his smile, still looking to the sky. When I finally found my voice, I blurted out the first thing that came to mind. What I meant to ask was, "What do you want?" in an angry, commanding tone. What came out was a whimper. What? Regardless of whether or not humans can smell fear, they can certainly hear it. I heard it in my own voice, and that only made me more afraid. But he didn't react to it at all. He just stood there, smiling. And then, after what felt like forever, he turned around, very slowly, and started walking away. Just like that. Not wanting to turn my back to him again, I just watched him go, until he was far enough away to almost be out of sight. And then I realized something. He wasn't moving away anymore, nor was he dancing. I watched in horror as the distant shape of him grew larger and larger. He was coming back my way. And this time he was running. I ran too. I ran until I was off of the side road and back onto a better lit road with sparse traffic. Looking behind me then, he was nowhere to be found. The rest of the way home, I kept glancing over my shoulder, always expecting to see his stupid smile, but he was never there. I lived in that city for 6 months after that night, and I never went out for another walk. There was something about his face that always haunted me. He didn't look drunk, he didn't look high. He looked completely and utterly insane. And that's a very, very scary thing to see. Number 1. Booth World Industries. Like a lot of you, I called that number for Booth World Industries. Before I called, I read through the responses in the thread. I like knowing what's going to happen before it happens. I guess I'm boring like that. It was still a sick thrill to dial in the number and hit call even though I knew what was coming. I was on the home phone and made sure to block my info. Just in case. Something went wrong, though. You all got a voicemail. I got a live person. Welcome to Booth World Industries. My name is Samantha and I will be your operator today. Name? I froze at this point. I didn't know what to say. I expected a canned message like the rest of you got, maybe even the weird text. I never expected a real person to pick up. I panicked and hung up the phone. When it started ringing 5 seconds later, I left the house to go pick up my daughter Ariana from school. On the way back, my cell started ringing. Ariana loves the hands-free phone in our car. She likes to pick it up and pretend like it's the intercom of a spaceship and that the caller is a Chilan. I blame my husband's frequent viewing of Battlestar Galactica for this. Mommy, Ariana asked, can I push the button? Sure, I said. Make it fast before the light changes, though. Ariana unbuckled her seatbelt and reached up between the two front seats to hit the button that would pick up the phone. Hello, she said, after she waited for the beep that let you know the phone picked up. I heard the same voice from earlier, flat. Almost robotic. Welcome to Booth World Industries. My name is Samantha and I will be your operator today. Name? Everything stopped for me then. The light turned green. Cars drove by. The cars behind me honked. But I sat there, staring at my steering wheel. Reddit, no sleep is supposed to be a place for scary stories. A place where you can scare yourself a little, but be fine at the end. A place you live out your fears. There was nothing safe about that woman's voice on the other end of the phone. Mommy? Ariana asked. Is everything okay? Hello, Ariana, the operator said. Welcome to Booth World Industries. My name is Samantha and I will be your operator today. Name? Ariana. My daughter said. Ariana, stop, I said. Mrs. Jacobs, the woman said. Please call the office when you get home. We have some remodeling to schedule. I didn't answer. I hung up the phone and drove the rest of the way home. Ariana looked up at me as we walked up the driveway. Was that a Chilan? I smiled, even though it felt like someone had skewered my stomach to the concrete and it was still writhing around there. No, honey, I said. Chilans aren't real. My little girl looked up at me. Her brow wrinkled and she frowned. That broke my heart. It was the first time I'd lied to her. No, it wasn't a Chilan on the other end of the line, but there was something lacking in the Booth World operator's voice. Something broken. Something human. Something dead. When we got inside, I made Ariana a bowl of cereal and took it to her room. I turned on SpongeBob SquarePants for her to watch, and I knew what I had to do. I typed the Booth World Industries number into my cell, 630-296-7536. When I brought the phone up to my ear, someone was breathing on the other end. I never even heard it ring. Hello? I asked. Welcome to Booth World Industries. My name is Samantha and I will be your operator today. Name? My mouth went dry. I knew what I was supposed to do. Janice Hoffman, I said. Janice was my boss at work. Although her voice reminded me of Fran Drescher's, her constant exploring hands reminded me more of that sleazy boss from Disclosure. On the other end of the phone, I could hear Samantha pounding on the keyboard. It sounded like she was wearing one of those cordless headsets and slamming her face down on the keys. Janice Hoffman, she said. Remodeling is scheduled for January 14, 2022. Would you like to reschedule? Yes, I said. We have an opening on Monday. That's fine. Would you like a courtesy call? I wanted nothing to do with listening to someone die. No, I said. Are you sure, Mrs. Jacobs? Yes, all right. On Monday, the 13th, we have Janice Hoffman scheduled for remodeling. Fine, Mrs. Jacobs. Yes? How would you like to pay for this? What the hell was she talking about? The original story never mentioned anything about payment. Pay? I asked. Yes, Mrs. Jacobs. When you schedule a remodeling, the scheduling is final unless another member shifts the scheduled date. We expect payment in full before service is rendered. What's the price? Ariana. The name hung in the air. Ariana? I whispered. What do you mean, the price for the scheduled remodeling is your daughter, Ariana? If you do not pay, we will have no choice but to repossess what is due. My blood ran cold when she said, repossess. I could hear her smiling on the other end of the phone. The first fragment of emotion she'd shown yet. What's the difference between a payment and a repossession? I asked, closing my eyes. You can earn any payment back, parts of it at least, by referring new members. Unfortunately, all repossessions are final. Why are you doing this? Ma'am, you responded to our ad on Reddit No Sleep and called us. You contracted work on Janice Hoffman. Now we are at the payment stage. The cost of the work is your daughter Ariana. You can't have her. Wonderful. Repossession is scheduled then. We at Booth World Industries say thanks and welcome to the club. You have a marvelous day. I jumped when the phone clicked. I took it away from my head and stared at it. If I hadn't felt like I was going to cry and throw up at the same time, I would have laughed. Everything was crazy. I was crazy. I stared at my cell's display. The Booth World Industries number was still sitting there on the screen. I ran to Ariana's room. It was empty. The bowl of cereal sat on the towel I always put under anything Ariana ate in case of spills. Sitting in the bowl was a business card. I took a picture because I thought I was going crazy and I thought that the card wouldn't be there if I blinked. When I picked the card up, it was warm, baking with wet heat. My skin crawled, and I threw it down. It landed backside up in the bowl. I heard a roar outside and made it out just in time to see a mad black Chevelle SS roll around the corner. I called the police. They sent out an officer and he took down all my info. An Amber Alert was issued. The waiting began. I felt desperate, so I visited Reddit Booth World, but the subreddit was private. I got a call a few hours later. The number is from a 917 area code. Hello? I asked. I already knew who would be on the other end. Ma'am, this is Samantha with Booth World Industries again. Your courtesy call begins now. I hung up. My cell started ringing again. 323 area code. I took the battery out of my cell. My house phone started ringing. Caller ID read an 832 area code. I didn't answer. I pulled the jack from the wall and sat down with my face in my hands. I couldn't bring myself to think about what was happening. I sat there and cried, feeling completely helpless. That's when the phone started ringing. My cell buzzed across the table, away from its battery, and my unplugged home phone rang louder than it ever had before. I got in my car and left. I went to Walmart and used a payphone to call the detective in charge of Ariana's case. His name was Stark. After waiting for a long time on hold, Stark picked up. Mrs. Jacobs, he said. Have you found her? I asked. No, but we traced the number. It was a cell phone from some kid a block over from where you live. He said that he never made the call, but the carrier says otherwise. The kid says that he called a number for just a second. Here it is, Booth World Industries. On a site called Reddit. Reddit, I corrected. That's what I said. There's no record of Booth World Industries anywhere. We're holding the kid and I'll let you know if anything happens, okay? Is that all? I asked. I just want my daughter back. Yes, ma'am. It's best if you leave this to us, okay? All right. Good, Stark said. We at the police department say thanks and you're welcome to call if you need to, but I'm sure that we'll be in touch soon. You have a marvelous day. I hung up the phone, and it started ringing immediately. I picked it up, stupidly hoping it was Stark with new info. It wasn't. A male's voice growled into my ear. The scheduled work has been completed. We at Booth World Industries say thanks and welcome to the club. Reddick Booth World is now open. You have a marvelous day. The line dropped and I hung up the phone. I brought my hand up to my ear. It was warm with his breath. Edit, I made a mistake. Everything is fine. We at the Jacobs household say thanks. You have a marvelous day. Welcome to my channel. Hope you enjoyed. Please like, share, and subscribe and turn on the bell notification button to receive the latest videos. Thank you.